the life well lived? Is there a God? And what is infrastructure? What is infrastructure? One of the questions that we continue to grapple with as human beings, as fallible, mortal creatures. Jennifer Granholm is not such a fallible, mortal creature. She's the Energy Secretary, and she is former governor of Michigan, incredibly. And she tackled that on Clinton Foundation Donor Zero's program over the weekend.
What is infrastructure? Historically, it's been what makes the economy move. What is it that we all need to ensure that we as citizens are productive? So we need roads, we need bridges, we need transmission, you need lights in people's homes and offices. You need to make sure that people can actually go to work if they have an aging parent or a child. This is, as the president said this week, that infrastructure evolves to meet the American people's aspirations.
Yes. Infrastructure is ever evolving. You can't pin infrastructure down. Yeah. And it needs to, so that we can stay competitive with our Chinese communist overlords. Jennifer Granholm knows this firsthand. She was part of a trade mission there. And she recounted last week a conversation she had with a Chinese communist businessman about green energy, per her rolling out all the magical green energy targets the Biden administration has, reducing the cost of solar by half over the next decade and adding 30 gigawatts of wind power to the eastern seaboard's grid and all these wonderful things, because hey, if we don't.
After I was finished being governor, I traveled to China to see their clean energy efforts. I was with a group, and we went to a city, and I was standing next to the mayor of the city in China, and during a demonstration, he leaned over to me and he said, "So, when do you think the United States is going to get a clean energy plan?" And at this point, and this was several years ago, I said, I don't know. There's so much polarization. It's difficult in Congress to get consensus. And he just looked at me and he smiled and he said, "Take your time. Take your time." Because they saw our passivity as their opportunity.
Yeah.
Oh my God! The
it's
drama.
She didn't mention any of the 4 dozen coal burning plants that they're building. I guess that wasn't part of that trade mission. For more on this in the context of the $2 trillion worth of funny money Green New Dealing, pleased to be joined again by our friend Jim Iuorio, no longer CNBC.
Oh yes.
Market analyst, now Fox Business analyst. Jim, newly minted Fox Business analyst. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Also, restaurateur. We should note, of course, Branson, Palatine.
Yeah, if you weren't going to, I was going to. You'd make sure of that, right?
Yeah, no, I figured I'd beat you to the punch on that. Right. So Jim, first of all, discard your antiquated understanding of what infrastructure means. And then secondly, open your mind to the possibility of this $23 trillion clean energy market that we're going to corner under the stewardship of Jennifer Granholm and Joe Biden.
But also, we're going to try to mirror China, and I think as long as we're doing that, we should probably mirror them in all kinds of ways. They just seem like they got it all going on there. This is the thing about infrastructure, how infuriating it was. And again, we on the show have talked about traps before. Like, they'll say the single most outrageous thing, and then if you come back and say, well, it's stupid, it's not infrastructure, they'll be like, what, you're against child care? Well, yeah, no, I am against the state providing any sort of upbringing of kids. There's no question about that. But if they can define infrastructure however they want, and you can make that argument that, anything that makes things go better and frees people up, then you can bring it down to anything you want. And nachos and hair care products are going to be infrastructure within the next couple of weeks. This is outrageous. And again, All these things I believe to be just traps. I think they're acting ridiculous on purpose. Andrew Cuomo giving $15,000 to every illegal immigrant, he just wants people like you and I to say, that's stupid, and then they can point to us and say, well, clearly you're against immigration. So, yeah, am I going to fall for it? Yeah, I'm going to fall for it. They don't know what infrastructure means, it seems like. I don't know if our school systems failed or they're just a bunch of morons.
Well, how much money is actually of that $2 trillion is actually going to improve roads and bridges?
I thought it was about 20%. And then, again, I was arguing with people, and I said, I know absolutely for sure that it's not an infrastructure bill. And the reason I know that is because they're calling it an infrastructure bill. And based on the history, anything they say, you can look to that bill and know that it's not what they said. So, I mean, it's outrageous. It's just throwing money at things. And even like the notion that they can increase by tenfold money that's going toward health research. Every bit of history on that is that when you increase a government budget like that, all that happens is that corruption goes through the roof. It's like people out there going, oh yeah, that's a good idea. You'll throw more money at health research. It's just dumb. It doesn't work that way when the government does it.
And Jim, you're a bit myopic. You're not understanding the scope
Clearly.
of the problem that this is attempting to solve. For example, we know from Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who apparently he's the transportation secretary now. He's the guy who rides his bike, at least
Yeah,
right
for
up until
photo
the
ops.
meeting. Yeah,
Smart.
right. Gets
Yeah.
out of the SUV to ride his bike to the meetings.
Yeah.
That guy. The national highway system is racist, predicated on racism. And so when you have to deal with racist highways and byways, you have to think more holistically. There has to be a certain gestalt to infrastructure that addresses not just the crumbling roads and bridges, but the racism underlying the roads and the bridges. And here again, Granholms said 40% of this plan, the benefits of this plan, which are dubious, would go to the victims of that they've so defined, marginalized communities whose voices haven't been heard. So that's part of infrastructure too, is giving people who are in marginalized communities, as defined by the government, their voices back. In addition to dealing with those racist highways and byways.
No, and to keep people who are listening up to speed on this notion, this is not a new notion, and there is at least a couple grams of truth to it. Is that when highways were built, they tended to take over land in poorer neighborhoods other than rich neighborhoods. And now the Democrats are contending that was a racist thing. But I mean, if you look at it from an economic standpoint, and again, this underscores the most important point about the argument between the two sides. If we were looking at where to build a highway, the question becomes, do we angle it through a poor, less developed neighborhood? Do we angle it through a rich neighborhood? It's obvious that for the long-term good of everything, you want rich neighborhoods. You don't want to destroy every neighborhood, but that's exactly the point, is that they want everybody to have equal, and the only way everyone can have equal is if they destroy everything. And that's a sad state of affairs. And it's absurd to start saying now that we're going to change the whole highway system based on its racism that was from 60 years ago.
Well, this is going to create 19 million jobs. I'm sorry, not 19 million, 2.7 million. Correction there over the weekend, Pete Buttigieg again. Not 19 million, as he and Biden were saying, but 2.7 million jobs. It's a bit of a rounding error in government, off by a factor of 8. 2.7 million jobs for $2.3 trillion. That seems like a great ROI.
Sure, and we want the government to be creating jobs instead of the private sector, because those are always going to be the ones that have the most future. And again, like I was thinking of the whole high-speed rail thing too. This is just so typical of our government in particular, is that we're going to start on high-speed rail now. By the time high-speed rail comes around in 10 years, every advantage that high-speed rail would have given us 30 years ago is going to be eliminated by artificial intelligence, machine learning, electric vehicles. Even in the West right now, there's freight that's being moved in trucks that are electric and have no drivers, or no drivers are going to be needed on those. So it's so perfect that we are going to embark on these huge projects that will be completely antiquated once they're released. And that's what government does, because they can't nimbly switch from project to project based on what is hot and what's new and what the consumer demands. And that's, I mean, again, there's no economist on the planet who wouldn't nod to that notion. And yet we're going to let the government just direct everything. It's just.
And there was a Wharton study of the American Jobs Plan, as it's called, a Wharton study, and it finds that any combination of the spend plus the tax increases that have been proposed, with or without the tax increases, any combination reduces the GDP of America, both in the short term over the next 10 years as well as in the long term over the next 30 years, reduces GDP. So how is it a jobs plan? How is this provide a return on investment where under any scenario you contract gross domestic product?
See, we know for certain now, we don't have to debate what the left's attitude towards taxes are. In 2008, when Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were debating, they acknowledged that raising the capital gains tax would, in fact, reduce the receipts from that tax. They didn't care. They didn't care about collecting taxes. And Barack Obama's answer to it was, it's just fairness, meaning that if someone has lots of money, we should take that money away. So the point is, that I'm trying to make is that they know the corporate tax rate, taking it from 21% to 28%, all it's going to do is get us reacquainted with the expression tax inversion as companies start to domicile in Ireland. And we knew that too. Janet Yellen knows it's an awful tax plan, and that's why she's been pleading with the rest of the world to follow our mistakes so we're not at such a competitive disadvantage. So
which is not going to happen, by the way.
Of course, I hope it's not going to happen too. I think when Walgreens announced that they were having a tax inversion back in the Obama years, I was like, good for them. I'm an owner of their stock. Money should go to where it's treated best. What she's trying to do is taking away the competitiveness of economics, and the whole capitalist system globally is built on competitiveness.
You're going to have Ireland more than double its corporate tax to keep pace with America. Why would they do that?
I certainly hope not. I want them to take advantage of your opponents. And in the world of economics, you have to think in terms, allies are your sometimes economic opponents, as in the burger business. Guys, and these are my friends who have other restaurants in the northwest suburbs. But at the end of the day, it makes everybody better to compete. And I hope to God that Ireland knows that.
The problem isn't too much money. You're using the wrong nomenclature again. Please use the accepted vernacular, Jim.
Which is?
It's not too much money. Excess profits is the enemy. Excess profits. We have to deal with excess profits through taxation.
Yeah, profit motive is not what fuels it. He doesn't believe in profit motive. He believes in the spirit of cooperation. Bernie Sanders has said that numerous times. Imagine someone who's never been in business, has never had a job, believing that, profit motive isn't what's really driving things. It's the spirit of cooperation, or at least we can move to that. That's, again, this is someone who's never had a job, and he couldn't be my dishwasher. He'd be fired after a day of spouting that nonsense.
Unionize the kitchen before you know it.
Yeah. As a restaurant owner, there's talk of having vaccine passports, but having that the onus being on the restaurant owner. So would you ever require any of your patrons to show that they have been vaccinated in order to eat at Branson Palatine?
You're going to make me answer this question. This will never happen at Branson Palatine. Which is funny is that we have at Branson, there's a decent amount of older people who are patrons, and they come in and they talk about their vaccines, and they're excited right now, and they're so glad to be back out, and I'm happy as hell for them. I think that it's a great thing. But the notion that I'm ever going to prove my vaccination status to go to a restaurant, to go to a concert, to go to a play, that's never going to happen, and we're never going to require that at Branson. And as far as I had a conversation with a police officer a long time ago in the beginning of this, and I said, if you want to deputize me and give me one of those fat pensions, I'll start enforcing your rules. But independent of that, you pretty much got to come in here and take care of that yourself, because I'm not doing it.
I wanted to get one more review of a macro comment from you. This was Jay Powell on 60 Minutes yesterday talking about the economy and his concern that it may be reopening too quickly. Interesting.
What we're seeing now is really an economy that seems to be at an inflection point, and that's because of widespread vaccination and strong fiscal support, strong monetary policy support. We feel like we're at a place where the economy is about to start growing much more quickly and job creation coming in much more quickly. So the principal risk to our economy right now really is that the disease would spread again. It's going to be smart if people can continue to socially distance and wear masks.
The disease that's spreading is people who can't stay in their lanes. Fauci wants to be an economist, and Jay Powell wants to be an epidemiologist. But the larger point that he makes, no problem continuing asset purchases, no problem keeping rates low, and the only concern is obviously inflation, with his concern about reopening too fast.
Yeah, and it's funny is that, and again, this has been a criticism of mine for 20 years. This is nothing new, is the Fed's ability to spot inflation, which I jokingly refer to as the Wonder Bread Index, where they call the jewel every Thursday and ask what the price of Wonder Bread is. And they miss the fact that lumber has tripled. The yield curve, and again, I don't want to get too far in the woods for people, but the yield curve started to steepen, which is an indication of inflation, but that since then has kind of stabilized. And the reason for that is that the world's central banks continue to buy their own bonds and other people's bonds. The German 10-year yield is negative 0.35. So our 10-year yield can't go that much higher because there's an arbitrage between the two. So Jay Powell can look at the yield curve and say, the market's a little bit worried about inflation, despite the fact that he himself is also buying $80 billion a month of our longer end debt. So I think that the notion that there's no inflation is absurd. There's clearly inflation. All I have to do is look at Florida real estate, lumber, yield curve, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is cryptocurrencies are a $2 trillion inflation hedge now. That if that money had been released into the other assets, imagine the bubble creating potential that could have. So Jay Powell and the entire Fed, and I'm going back several different Fed chairmen. They live in this world of academia where they believe that the CPI tells them where there's inflation, and they miss absolutely tons of other inflation.
Jim Iuorio, Fox business analyst, proprietor of Branson in Palatine. Jim, thanks as always.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer.